Okay? Now, because I've only got about 10 or 15 minutes with you, what I would like to do is to give you a complete history of Australia, right, in 15 minutes. But to try and limit it, I'm only going to go back about 200 million years, right, to keep it short. And that's relevant to understand Australia. About 200 million years ago was the last time that the Earth had one big block of land and sea. Okay, and that was called Pangaea, and then it split about 200 million years ago into halves. The top half, Libations, and the bottom half, Gondwana. And in Gondwana, where we are still, there was Australia, India, Africa, South America, and Antarctica. And in Libations was Asia and North America and Europe and so on. Now, some significant things then started to happen, because with evolution going, we now had two halves of evolution starting to work. That got more and more split, because after a little while, India went rocketing up and hit into Asia and rammed up the Himalayan mountains. Very fast movement. South America drifted over and connected up with North America in your area. Africa rammed up into Europe, created the Alps in Europe and so on. And that just left Antarctica and Australia hanging around down south. About 50 million years ago, Australia got detached from everything. And I mean everything. We're going to exclude Antarctica, because Antarctica ain't doing nothing. It's just staying there on the South Pole. Nothing's living, nothing's doing, it's just there. But we split her out and started heading north. Okay, this was significant because it means that for 50 million years, Australia has no contact with anything. So a lot of our animals and birds and plants, trees and so on have evolved in Australia. And if you look at the world today, you'll realise, most people don't think about this, but there are three blobs of land in the world. One is the Antarctica useless thing, the other is Australia, and the rest is the rest. Because if you go from the bottom of South America up through the Caribbean area, into America, across the Bering Strait, into Russia, India, Africa, all that's basically connected. Birds and animals and things can get across. So, but Australia is disconnected and hasn't been connected for 50 million years. That's long enough for a lot of things to become different.
What about the birds? They don't migrate?
Well, not those distances. Too much distance. You notice this most in the bizarre animals that we have by world standards. The ones you know about, the kangaroo. Probably the most bizarre animal that we have in the world is uniquely Australian, is the platypus. The platypus. Not very common, but it's pretty much all over the wetter parts of Australia.
What's the proper name for kangaroo? I had done some reading, and when I was reading it said that that's really not the name for the animal, but when the person who had come asked the native what it was, he misunderstood what they said.
Yeah. Look, you'll get that story on a lot of things, because I'll come back to that in a minute and you'll see why. So the next thing to understand about Australia is that the people of Australia. Now, if you go back into the history of mankind, we humans became Homo sapiens about 250,000 years ago. We said, my God, there's a human. Right? That's when we sort of started as our species. In Africa. Didn't move out of Africa. Just before that time, about 300,000 years ago, a variety of earlier us, commonly called Neanderthal man, got up into Europe, and another form called Denisovan man, which is not well known because it's only been discovered about 3 years ago, got up into Asia about the same sort of time. About 70,000 years ago, climate change, forget climate change we're talking about today, historically we have had massive climate change. And a number of times the Sahara Desert and the Middle East has been rainforest. How's that for climate change? And during those times, the human population got out of Africa and walked and travelled through comfortable, nice green country out into the world. Significantly, 70,000 years ago, they moved out, got into the coastline of India, wandered down, that coastline's underwater now, came down India, got into Indonesia and stopped. About 60, 70,000 years ago. Around about 60,000 years ago, somehow people who had no boating history, they were land people totally, got across to Australia. Now there's contention about how that happened. If they came across by boats, we've got to rewrite history, because we didn't think that people had any sort of boating at that time. We think now that the way this may have happened was because they lived off the land and because they climbed trees a lot to get fruit and chase monkeys and so on for food, and because Australia is moving north, Australia is ramming into things. Now over on our east coast, the edge of our Teutonic plate is ramming into New Zealand. So are two other Teutonic plates ramming into New Zealand. New Zealand's the worst real estate deal in the world. It ain't got long to live. It's just getting smashed up. So don't invest in New Zealand, or your great grandchildren won't thank you for it. But that's us ramming into New Zealand. To the north of us, we're ramming into Papua New Guinea. And that's pushing up the highest, the fastest growing mountains in the world. No one knows that because nobody cares about Papua New Guinea. It's just one of those forgotten countries. But a bit further over the left, we're ramming into Indonesia. And in Indonesia, we are causing hell. Volcanoes everywhere, earthquakes everywhere, tsunamis everywhere, because we're ramming into it. Now what we've discovered is, what we think happened was a tsunami came along, the coastal people said, good grief, what's this? Climbed up into the trees to get away from the water comes in, the water goes out again and takes the tree out, and the currents head towards Australia. It takes about 2 weeks for a floating object to get to Australia from Indonesia, so that's how we think we got there. In terms of surviving that 2 weeks, it's in monsoon country, so every day at 4 o'clock you get fresh water. And if they were in a fruit tree, there'd be some fruit in the tree, they might have got some fish, etc.